I don't know, I just have that feeling. Of course, our keynote speaker, Senator Nunn, is one of those warriors. Senator Nunn is co-chair and CEO of the Nuclear Threat Initiative, a charitable organization working to reduce the global threats from nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. But of course, we know Senator Nunn as a United States Senator for 24 years from the good state of Georgia, and the longtime chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee. We also know him as truly one of the giants in the U.S. Senate and a true statesman in the very best sense of the word. When Senator Nunn retired in 1997, hundreds of pieces of legislation bore his name. Everything from major reorganization of the military to the program he created with Senator Richard Lugar. And just to remind us, Senator Nunn, Democrat, Senator Lugar, Republican. This program helped the Russians dismantle their nuclear missiles and then convert them into fuel for our own nuclear power plants. So to put that in perspective, 1 out of 10 light bulbs today in the United States is powered by reprocessed nuclear fuel that once sat atop enemy missiles aimed at us. Quite a remarkable legacy. And there it is, that bipartisanship, that sense that our leaders need to work together for the good of the entire country. Senator Nunn said this as he left the Senate. I never accomplished anything without the help of someone from the other party. What a personal thrill and honor for me it is to introduce Senator Nunn to all of you.
It's my great pleasure to be here this morning and to ask Senator Nunn some questions, get a conversation going, and then open up for questions from you after a discussion between the Senator and me. And thank you very much for inviting me, and I think I came to the right place to launch a national book tour. So, since nuclear weapons have been much on my mind in recent years as I've been working on this book, and they've certainly been on Senator Nunn's mind for a lot longer than that, let's start by talking for a minute or two about nuclear threats. It's my feeling that there is no greater danger to American security than the prospect of a terror group in possession of a nuclear weapon that they either acquire or manage to build on their own. We've spent many years trying to prevent exactly that kind of danger, as well as others associated with nuclear weapons. How do you think we're doing today? How serious do you think that kind of threat is?
Well, Philip, I agree with you that catastrophic terrorism using a weapon of mass destruction, probably nuclear, but also possibly biological, is the greatest security threat we face. Not because countries with nuclear weapons aren't dangerous, and that could be the source of nuclear materials that would go into a bomb, but because countries have a return address, and terrorist groups do not. And besides that, a number of the terrorist groups today are, as we well know, suicidal and could care less about what we traditionally call deterrence, that is, retaliation after an attack. So keeping nuclear weapons, but also nuclear materials, which are harder to protect than nuclear weapons, keeping them out of hands of terrorists, to me, is the #1 goal, security goal for our nation and the world. There are a lot of other goals, a lot of them are important, a lot of them overlap, but that has been the one that NTI, the Nuclear Threat Initiative that I co-chair with Ted Turner, that is the one we focused on as the #1.
When not long after President Obama took office, as all of you know, he gave an important speech in Prague on nuclear weapons policy. And he outlined a series of ambitious goals, many of which are similar to the ones that Senator Nunn has advocated in the quartet that he's part of with George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, and Bill Perry. So we're almost three years into the Obama administration. What's your view of how well the President has done on that agenda?
Well, I give President Obama very good marks on the nuclear agenda. I think he has tackled it head on. He had a nuclear security conference here in Washington about a year ago, 18 months ago. He had 40 heads of state there. It didn't get a lot of attention. There were other things going on, but it was a very big success in terms of putting the spotlight on protecting nuclear materials. I heard Steve Hadley's remarks a few minutes ago. I couldn't agree more with Steve when he made the point that we cannot protect our security at home without cooperation abroad. Nuclear materials that could be used to make a nuclear weapon are in over 32, 35 countries around the globe right now. And there are a lot of other countries that have to cooperate to prevent the transit or illicit taking or theft or sale of those materials. So we have to have cooperation abroad. The Obama speech in the Czech Republic was remarkable in the sense he endorsed the goal of a world without nuclear weapons, which George Shultz and Henry Kissinger and I and Bill Perry have been advocating. We also advocate a whole number of steps that have to go with that. And without the steps, you're not going to have a realistic sense of the vision. Perceptions around the world. If you don't take the steps, you will not have the confidence. But without the vision, you're not going to get the cooperation that you need around the globe. So I gave President Obama high marks on that. Not only that, but he led a session of the Security Council. I happened to be there with Henry Kissinger and Shultz and Bill Perry. And in that session, the Security Council endorsed that vision as well as the steps. So they're not talking about simply a dream world and a goal. They're talking about things that I believe in very fervently, and that is the steps you have to take to make the vision at some point realistic. I equate it with climbing to the top of a tall mountain. Right now, there's fog all over the place. We can't even come close to seeing the top of the mountain. We can't even see base camp, and we have avalanches coming down the mountain, like North Korea and Iran. So this is not something that we are saying is going to be achieved immediately. But in the near term, we have to aim for base camp. We have to take steps that can give our children and grandchildren hope. Because without that hope, and this is got to be a global mission and a global hope, then we're not going to have the realistic steps we need to protect our security, not only in the long term, but in the immediate term and in the medium term. So that's kind of the way I view it. The steps and the vision go together. I've never been enthused about simply announcing a broad goal without having the vision of how you get to that goal. It's going to take verification. It's going to take enforcement. We're better at verification than we have been, but we've got a lot of technology we have not in any way begun to use in terms of verification. We have to be confident. The world has to be confident. Before countries are going to give up their nuclear weapons, they have to be confident that others are going to give up their nuclear weapons. This is not a unilateral mission. And they have to be confident that the global body politic will enforce when we find that by verification, there have been breaches by any country or any group. So all of those things have to go together. In the meantime, in the short term, we've got to protect nuclear material everywhere on the face of the globe. Because we have the makings of a perfect storm. We have terrorist groups who would use weapons if they were able to get them. They're not going to likely get a weapon. It's possible, but it's not likely. But they could likely get nuclear material that could make a weapon. Not a sophisticated weapon that would go on an ICBM and fly all over the world, but a crude weapon that would go in the back of a truck and pull into a major city or harbor. So we've got the ingredients of a perfect storm. A group willing to use weapons if they get them, nuclear material around the globe, and the know-how to make a weapon has dramatically increased in recent years. So all of those things go together to make this an extremely dangerous time. But we can get cooperation. And the illustration that was given a few minutes ago, about 10% of our electricity in this country coming from material that was blended down from highly enriched uranium to low enriched uranium and now into nuclear fuel. 10% of our electricity in America comes from that material that was aimed at us 30 years ago. So that's a parable of hope. We bought that material from Russia and from Ukraine after they blended down the material into weapons that they dismantled. 3 countries gave up their nuclear weapons when the Soviet Union broke up. Many people don't realize that. This would be a far more dangerous world if Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and Belarus still had their weapons. They went down to 0. South Africa gave up a nuclear weapons program. There's hope there. Libya, of course, gave up under great pressure a nuclear weapons program. So this is not a hopeless mission. This is a realistic set of goals, a realistic set of steps that absolutely are essential to protect our security, and cooperation is absolutely essential to be able to foster that kind of accomplishment.
I want to turn to some of the other subjects that I know you've all selected, but before doing that, I just want to say, I think many of you probably are aware of this, but in the travels that I undertook for my book, it became pretty clear, as Senator Nunn has alluded to, there is a lot of highly enriched uranium, weapons-grade uranium, in insecure locations around the world. The engineering of a primitive nuclear weapon is not that difficult. The bomb the United States dropped on Hiroshima was a uranium bomb. It was not even tested before it was dropped. The scientists at the Manhattan Project were so sure it would work that they didn't even test it before they used it. So this is a very serious threat that we face. Let's turn to economic issues. Steve Hadley alluded to these. In your capacity as someone who served as chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, you probably have some thoughts about budget and debt issues from 2 perspectives. One is just the pure economics of the United States trying to operate in the world as a world leader encumbered by all this debt and how we should address it. But as you know, if the super committee in Congress fails, one of the first things that's going to happen is some across-the-board deep cuts in the defense budget. So I'd like to get your thoughts on both aspects of that.
I had the great privilege last night of presenting on behalf of an organization called the Concord Coalition, which has been in existence for some time, and it focuses on fiscal matters. This is completely nonpartisan. Warren Redmond and Bob Kerry chair that organization. But last night we gave an award to Saxby Chambliss and Mark Warren, the 2 people who led the group of 6. And that group of 6 has now become a much larger group. In fact, Alan, I saw in the paper this morning that 100 members of the House, or 40 members of the Republican Party have now said what is absolutely basic arithmetic, that you got to play with the whole deck of cards. You can't play with 25% of the budget and think you're going to tackle a $10 trillion projected deficit over the next 10 years. That's what we're projecting now, 10 trillion. That's not a B, that's a T. Now, what they're talking about right now, under the procedure they got with the super committee, is trying to find another 1.2, which would give them 2 trillion saved out of the 10 trillion projected, leaving 8 trillion more expenditures than income over the next 10 years. The more ambitious members of the Congress are aiming for 4 trillion, which would still leave 6 trillion in deficit. So we've got a big problem. We'd like to say we owe it to ourselves. We could for many years. We no longer owe it to ourselves. About half of our foreign debt now, which is about 14 trillion total, is owed to people abroad. This makes us a lot more dependent on world markets. Certainly it's in their interest for those who have our T-bills to keep the United States economy going. I'm not saying anybody, even including China, is going to try to deliberately sabotage their own well-being and their economy, but when you're dependent on foreign capital, just one example, if you look at the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq in the last 8 or 10 years, a very substantial portion of those wars were paid for by borrowing from China. Now, you know, when you get into a war in North Korea, if you do, and God forbid that, but if you did, how willing is China going to be willing to pay for that one? You know, we've got to really scratch our head and say, what are we doing in this country to our future? What are we doing to our grandchildren and children? So some members of the Congress are moving in that direction. To me, it's not physics, and it's not ideology, and it's not calculus. It's basic arithmetic. You have to deal with a whole set of cards. Steve laid out the entitlement programs, now something like 2/3 of the budget. They're not even in this hostage package. If this committee fails, there's a package that slices the discretionary programs, including very big cuts in defense. So we're not playing with the whole deck of cards, and that's what I think the American people have to emphasize. As I see our political system, and this is particularly true in fiscal matters, but it's true in broader matters, we're like two wings out there flapping, the left wing and the right wing with no fuselage. There's no center. The center is not involved in this. People in the center usually don't contact their congressmen and senators in the way that people on the wings do. They're fired up. The wings are fired up, the center is asleep, and America may not stay airborne if we do not change that. These people in the Congress that are willing to take on their own party, in fact, I would say, if you're not today willing to take on the zealots in your own political party on the fiscal matters, you're not protecting America. So, Philip, long answer, but the super committee has more power than any committee's had in a long time. But they were appointed by the leaders of the House and Senate. In my view, have to be held accountable. The White House has to be held accountable. I praised Obama on some foreign policy issues. Let me say that I give him very poor marks on not endorsing the Simpson-Bowles report when it came out. He didn't have him in the White House. He didn't endorse it. He didn't champion it. That was a big political mistake and a big economic mistake. I hope he will remedy that, but the leadership in the House and Senate have to be held accountable. It's not a coincidence, I'm afraid, that not a single member of that group of 6 who were working together, or it became a group of 8, I believe, not a single one of them was appointed to the super committee. Not one. So what does that tell you? To me, it tells me that the American people ought to say to the leaders of the House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats, you are also accountable. We know this committee cannot function and cannot come up with a result without your strong backing. And we're going to be holding you accountable for that. I think that's what's got to happen.
So, as someone who worked across the aisle so effectively in your career with Senator Nunn, among others, what has happened in the Senate? From the time I was here as a reporter and Washington bureau chief at the Times, the center is not only dormant around the country, it seems to be dead in Washington. And most of the members of the Senate who used to reach across the aisle have retired or been defeated. What's your view of how we set our politics straight at this point?
I don't know what you do about congressional reapportionment, but the fact over the last 30, 40 years that both parties have played this game in every possible way at the state level and national level. We've rigged the congressional districts so that they are absolutely safe except from primary opponents. And that gives the power to the wings. And you really, people, a lot of districts don't even have to talk to somebody who's on the other side of the questions because they know if they can keep their base, and their base usually are the activists. I'm not criticizing activists. God bless them for getting involved in what they believe in. But the American people in the middle have to get involved too. So the congressional reapportionment over the years has had an effect. But I also think that the sort of the talk show mentality has had an effect. I think people, generally speaking, we've always had people who were basically what I would call rabble-rousers. They've been able to stir the emotion of the people on a lot of issues. But the difference today is people are making a huge amount of money. They're getting paid to carve out niches in the American public and basically get on for hours at a time saying sick 'em, sick 'em, sick 'em. And that's firing up a whole lot of emotions that really are hard to deal with when you're trying to tackle things like fiscal policy and energy policy. A lot of things are pretty complicated. So campaign financing, Supreme Court's making that one very difficult. But we've got to have a better way of financing our campaigns. When my friends tell me subcommittee chairman in the House and Senate are being given quotas of the people they have legislative jurisdiction over to raise so much money or they lose that chairmanship, and I start thinking third world. This is not the way to run democratic government. So we got a lot of things we need to do. I come back to the leadership of the House and Senate. I think they've got to work together better. We had sort of an unwritten rule that my former colleagues, the older senators, told me when I first got there, and I always adhered to it. Basically, they didn't campaign against incumbents from the other party. It's very hard to go out and campaign against people and then come back and work with them when you've been out there on the campaign trail, basically going after them in every way possible. And that's what's happened in the last 20, 25 years. And the other thing, the fundraising side is a big problem because it's not, to me, it's not corruption so much in the sense you give me $100 and I'll do what you say. I don't think many people in Congress engage in that kind of quid pro quo. But it's intellectual corruption because they spend all their time on fundraising. And that's what sometimes I think our friends on the Supreme Court don't realize. It's dominating the time and the intellect of the people in politics and the energy. So what happens? They have to get on an airplane every Thursday and they basically fly somewhere. People from Georgia fly to New York, California. So they're going all over the country to raise money. And then during the week, you basically have a recess for 2 hours every night so people can go out and raise funds. I mean, we've got to tackle this problem. It's poisoning our atmosphere. If it continues, and I hope it doesn't, but if the super committee doesn't reach a meaningful agreement, I think a meaningful agreement above $1.2 trillion, then I think the American people in the next election are going to be in the mood of Will Rogers when he once said that politicians are like diapers. They have to be changed often and for the same reason.
I'm trying to think of a segue to Pakistan and Afghanistan. But as you look, it's been, almost, it's been 10 years since 9/11, a little more than that. When you look at the American military intervention in Iraq and in Afghanistan, how do you judge those efforts and what worries you most today about threats that might emanate from Pakistan or Afghanistan?
Well, I think our mission in Afghanistan to really get rid of Al-Qaeda was absolutely justified and necessary after 9/11. That was the place where they were trained. That was a safe haven. But I think somewhere along the way we lost our sense of mission. We have really accomplished the original mission, as I said. We've pretty much gotten rid of Al-Qaeda. But right now, we are engaged in what I consider to be a civil war with the Taliban. Afghanistan has always been ruled by tribes. The chances of a central government, let alone a Jeffersonian type of government, coming out of that is pretty remote. So I would agree with the goal of moving the troops out of there. I hate to have time frames. I've always resisted time frames, but the military has to be given some kind of time frame. But I also believe it's got to be coupled with vigorous diplomacy, because the countries in that part of the world are going to end up dealing with Afghanistan even after we leave. And we need to have a vigorous economic effort, even including the Iranians, as hard as that is, to deal with the countries that surround Afghanistan. And we've got to have a Pakistan strategy. Pakistan and India, if you talk about nuclear dangers, Philip, I think that's the most likely place in the world for some kind of absolute catastrophe to come, including a possible exchange of nuclear weapons between the two countries, but also including the possibility of leakage of material to groups. So I think we have to have a strategy on Pakistan. It has to involve India, Pakistan, as hard as that is. Neither one of those countries want us involved. But Pakistan military is absolutely obsessed, not with Afghanistan, not with the Taliban, but with India. And our Indian friends, I think we have to find a way. I don't think it would be just the United States. I think it has to engage China. We have to engage China and Russia and other countries with this. So there's no easy solution there, but just getting out is not going to be sufficient. You're going to have India-Pakistan contest over who got the most influence in Afghanistan, and it could lead to the count of phobias. Those countries have lots of nuclear weapons. They have a very close proximity geographically. They have no experience like we had during the Cold War with Russia. We came very close to a nuclear war with Russia on several occasions, some of them by pure accident. India and Pakistan are just beginning that route. And so it's an extremely dangerous situation. And when we leave Afghanistan, it's not just Afghanistan, it's that whole region.
What do you say to people? I think many Americans look at Pakistan and wonder, we've given them billions of dollars in military aid, and yet, they are obviously supporting the Taliban in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. They acted outraged when we came into Afghanistan and killed Osama bin Laden. Why should we continue to be friends with Pakistan?
Well, let me give you one example. There's a supercomputer run that was in the American Scientific magazine about a year ago, and I read the article. Somebody had updated the old Cold War scenario, but this time the hypothetical was 100 weapons exploding between India and Pakistan, and they have far more than that collectively. The result of that would be several hundred million people killed immediately. But postulating the global cooling that would take place over the next 5 to 10 years, the estimate was on supercomputer runs, 1 billion people would starve in the world. That's why Pakistan is important, and that's why, as much as we have every reason to be frustrated and many times angry with them, it's fundamentally in our interest to try to find ways to deal with Pakistan. You also cannot expect Afghanistan to have a chance in any kind of stability, even regional dominated tribal type stability, without Pakistan cooperating. And so for all of those reasons, Pakistan is important, and we are important to Pakistan too. So I think we have to take a deep breath, count to 10, and still try to find a way to deal with it.
I don't know about the rest of you. I'm someone who finds it hard to believe that Pakistan, some elements of the government were not aware that Osama bin Laden was in their country, just a mile or two from their equivalent in West Point. So let's take some questions from all of you, please. I guess is there mics on the floor? So I don't know what your procedures are, but maybe it'd be good if you identified yourself.
Yes, I'm Joyce Davis. I'm President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Harrisburg. And we've done a lot of talking about the potential repercussions of our failing economy on the world and the debt we may have to pay to other countries. But I wonder if you might spend a little bit of time talking about the internal danger that we see. We've already heard a very convincing argument that the standard of living is going to be lower for all of us. This generation perhaps and the next. It's not going to go back to business as usual. But we're seeing the beginnings of unrest in our own country. We're seeing Occupy Wall Street. We're seeing it turn violent. We're seeing strikes. Would you talk a little bit about how we plan to deal with what is likely to be a serious psychological issue for Americans as they face a lower standard of living?
Yes, I've talked about our top national security strategy. I think our top overall strategy has got to be rebuilding here at home and restoring confidence at home. We can basically tackle our problems if they're solvable. Some countries in the world, when you look at it, even you look at Europe now, you wonder, is there a real answer to some of this? But in the United States, our problems are solvable. We just got to work together as a nation. And I think that's why getting the fiscal house in order is the #1 priority there. But we also may need some short-term stimulus too. I don't think we're in a position in this country where we can't think about doing two things at one time. One is stimulating the economy in the short term, and may take some more Fed action. I'm not one of those that says the Fed basically has caused this problem. I mean, we were going over the cliff. We being the world, we were going over the cliff about 4 years ago. And I give the Bush administration, I give the Obama administration, I give the Fed marks for not doing everything perfectly, but for keeping us from going into a deep depression. The R could have become a D very, very quickly. We were right on the verge of it. So I think we have to rebuild our economy here at home. I would focus on human capital, but also on increased savings. I think we have to change our tax system. I believe that there is a consensus beginning to build in the country, in Congress, that this is one area where the parties may agree, is that we basically go through the corporate tax code and get rid of a whole lot of the exemptions and then lower the corporate tax rate. Our corporate tax rate is no longer competitive in the world, and people are spending an awful lot of time basically getting around it. We also have literally, I don't know how many hundreds of billions of dollars abroad that's not being brought back here because of the tax penalties for bringing capital back. That makes no sense whatsoever. We need a territorial type tax. In my view, we need a tax that encourages savings. We need a tax system that encourages savings. I'm not for a retail sales tax, because that basically preempts state and local governments. But I would like to see us to take a look at the concept of Pete Domenici and I worked on for several years with a group here in town that basically was a tax we call the USA tax. You would basically take your income, you would subtract your savings, your financial savings, you pay the tax on the difference at the income tax level. It would not preempt the state and local tax base. But nevertheless, we need to do that. We also need to concentrate on human capital. We simply have got to improve our education system. I know we've been trying to do that, but our higher education system is the best in the world, but our elementary and secondary is not, in many cases, competitive. So we've got to really focus on rebuilding human capital and skills. I think we neglect skills in this country, and we don't give dignity to skills. We give all the premium to college education, and I'm all for college education. But we need a lot of skilled people in this country. There's an old saying that a nation that does not honor its plumbers as well as its philosophers will one day find that neither its pipes nor its theories will hold water. So skill training, I think, is important. Human capital and capital both.
So we're almost out of time. Let's try to do just a couple more questions. If you keep the questions brief, and Senator, maybe you can answer 2 or 3 more before we wind up. Let's go over here.
Yes, my name is Matt Hope from Peoria, Illinois, and I wonder if you would make a few comments about the size of the risk about the missing nuclear material.
The missing nuclear,
So-called missing nuclear material.
Loose nukes and things like that.
They're missing in terms of what's not accounted for right now.
Well, the problem when the Soviet Union broke up, there was not a baseline. If you don't have a baseline, and I know the American people get confused on fiscal baselines. We got so many baselines you can't tell where people are coming from. But we do not and never did have a good baseline on how much material was bad. We had a better one in the United States, but a long way from perfect. There are lots of nuclear material, huge quantities of it that sort of disappeared. And some of it is a natural process. It gets in pipes, it gets dissipated, it gets leaked out. That worries me. We, though, have gone through a period of maximum danger for the first 10 years after the Cold War. And in the area of protecting nuclear materials, the former Soviet Union, on a scale of 1 to 10, when they broke up, I would give them a 1 or 2. It was a very, very dangerous time. I'd say it's up to 7 or 8 now. It's not 10. Around the globe, because of the leadership of the Bush administration, as well as the great emphasis on it in the Obama administration, we have what we call the Global Threat Reduction Initiative, and that fund, to the tune of about $500 million, has helped secure vast amounts of nuclear material in countries all over the world. So on a global basis, on a score of 1 to 10, we were about 3 a few years ago. I'd say we're about 6 now. We have a way to go. South Korea is having a summit conference this year as a follow-up to the summit conference President Obama had in Washington, and countries from all over the world are going to come to that. And that summit conference is going to focus on nuclear material protection. That's something that my organization, NTI, has worked on a great deal. It was the focus when we started. We're going to publish an index sometime early next year. We're going to take 32 countries in the world that have either plutonium or uranium in weapon-grade form, and we're going to rate them in 4 or 5 different categories. So somebody is going to be at the bottom of the list. It's going to stir up some controversy, but we're going to, as an NGO, non-governmental organization, I don't think governments can do this. We're going to basically try to start a debate and dialogue about countries' responsibility all over the globe to protect our nuclear material, because our future is at stake. A catastrophic nuclear attack on any city in the world would not only be a catastrophe for that country, it would deal a psychological blow to the world economy that I don't think we've seen anything like. So we're going to publish that list. We're also going to take countries that do not have nuclear material, but all countries have a responsibility on the transit and corruption issues that could lead to that kind of theft and so forth. So we're going to rate them too. So I hope it's going to be greeted constructively as an instrument for countries to get better and improve. But we're going to publish it next January.
Thank you very much.
We've also stood up an organization in Vienna that is now hopefully going to become independent. We've funded it. Our organization has. It's called the World Institute of Nuclear Security. And it is basically, it's got experts together where they are basically inviting any entity around the globe, whether governments or laboratories or research reactors or even hospitals that have radiological material, to come together and to swap best practices about the safety and security of that material. We stood it up about a year ago. We now have some 500 members from around the globe. So a lot of things are being done. Long way to go, but progress is being made.
So I think we have time for one last question. If I might ask this, are you in the Navy uniform?
Yes, sir.
Okay, if you step in front of the mic, please.
Sir, Mitchell Ralph Francisco from Annapolis. Just wanted to go back to your comments about arithmetic, and I guess you were talking about the national debt and how that's such a central theme to everything.
Speak up a little bit.
Just going back to your comments about arithmetic, and I assume you're talking about the national debt and how central that is to our policy. My question to you is, how possible is it for us to actually lower our deficit given our political system? When's the last time anyone was ever elected on the platform of, I'm going to raise your taxes and or cut your spending? And additionally, to the American voter, what incentive do they have on an individual basis when they see, for example, a banking system that was rewarded for living far beyond their means and loading out a lot of mortgages that were very irresponsible? They were actually rewarded with a bailout. And the people who perpetrated a lot of those crimes, well, they're not crimes, they were responsible, were actually rewarded and kept afloat because they were too big to go under. So are we ever really going to pay off our national debt? That's what I'm asking.
Well, the first thing we've got to do is we're a long way from even stabilizing our national debt as a percentage of our economy. The first goal has got to be to stabilize our debt. That doesn't mean national debt doesn't grow. It means you don't let it grow out in disproportion to the growth of your economy. To do that requires the $4 trillion mark. That's the reason they selected it, $4 trillion. But you're absolutely right when you say that whoever got elected on basically saying we're going to raise revenue and cut your expenditures. But on the other hand, I think the American people now, the encouraging side is, for many years, this is not a new problem. This has been coming on for 30 years. There were a number of us that have talked about this for a long, long time, and I wish we'd done more 20, 30 years ago. But the entitlement programs are based on how many people are out there that fit certain categories, multiplied times the entitlement. So these are people in demographics and arithmetic is what it's all about. But I do believe the awareness of American people is going up. I'd say 5, 6 years ago, if you took a poll, and I'm just making this relative, and I haven't seen one, but if you took a poll and you asked about the percentage of the budget, people would say 10% of it's foreign aid, it's less than 1%. People would have a very distorted view. I used to get letters even a few years back from people that say, keep the government's hands off my Medicare. It is government. So you've got to have education. That has occurred. The encouraging thing, that's occurred in the last 2 years. We've had more discussion about the makeup of the federal deficit with the Simpson-Bowles Commission, with with the diminishing revenue commission in the last 2 years that we've had in the last 25 years combined. Now, I don't say 50% of the people understand it yet, but I do think that if it was 5% of the people 3 or 4 years ago who understood the makeup of this, I think it's 4 or 5 times that now. I think we've moved up to 20–25%. I think there are enough people out there who understand it now to demand accountability of people in office and require truth from them in the way they're describing it. And the American people have to demand that sound bites, party position, and ideological positions that basically say no cuts in entitlements, no enhanced revenue no matter what. Those have to be challenged. So the answer will be, it's going to be up to the American people. It's going to be up to the American people.
Thank you, Senator.
If we extrapolate if you want to look at the downside, if we extrapolate both parties' positions, I would say that before this next term is over, if we don't change, the Democrats' motto may be in the campaign, it's no longer a sin to be rich, it's a miracle. And the Republicans' motto may be, if stupidity got us in this mess, why won't it get us out? So, well, people will have to change that. I think that let us close on that note.